Hey guys, it's Mr. G again. Welcome to American Tradition. Today we're going to be looking at European exploration and expansion. So this topic is so interesting because without European exploration and expansion, we would not have the United States as we know it today. So during this age that we call the Age of Exploration, we see really Europe starts to take off in terms of leaving the small continent to go explore the rest of the world. What we're really talking about here is Europeans, really all of Christendom, expanding outward to find other trade routes, to find new places to live, to find places to colonize, really. And so a lot of these European explorers, they made voyages in search of wealth, in search of new lands, and in search of converts to Christianity. And so as Catholics, they had a holy mission to spread the word of God. Now, later on during the Reformation, this is going to change things a bit, and it's also going to change people's reasons for wanting to explore the New World. But we'll get to that later. So, as European countries set out, they established what we call the first global trading empires and the first age of exploration and colonization. Among these first explorers was Marco Polo. Marco Polo was a merchant from Venice. He traveled with his father to China and met the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan, son of the great Genghis Khan. Right? And so Marco Polo wrote a famous account of his travels. And there's actually some really great translations out there if you're ever interested. But among many different things, traveling over the Silk Roads, he found a lot of people were interested in his works and with some of the things he brought back, including pasta. You know, it's funny, we think of pasta as an Italian dish, but it originated in China. So when Marco Polo brings pasta back to Europe, it is quickly adopted by his Italian counterpart. Another reason that kind of spurred on exploration was not just the interest piqued by Marco Polo, but rather the conquest of the Ottoman Empire. See, in the 1300s, the Ottoman Turks had conquered most of what we call Byzantium, or the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, the last city of the Byzantine Empire, was conquered by Mehmed II, or Mehmed the Conqueror, in 1453. The Ottomans now controlled most of what we would call the Middle East. And with this control, they choked off a series of travel routes to East Asia through what we call the Silk Road. As the Ottoman Empire consolidated its control over the Middle East, Europeans had to find a new way to get to Asia and get to all these Asian goods that Marco Polo had introduced them to from his travels. While those are some of the practical reasons, we also have to understand some other reasons why European individuals went exploring. The main reasons are the 3 G's. These are gold, glory, and God. Gold is pretty obvious. Merchants, adventurers, and state officials hoped that they would get a return on investment from these explorations. The Spanish crown was hoping to find new trade routes, and so by financing these explorations, they could get a return on their policy through increased trade and monopolies over certain spice trades. Likewise, individuals sought fame and glory, right? The status in their home countries and the immortality of history books. And some of these individuals, as we'll see, achieved just that. We cannot underrepresent how much the Catholic Church motivated individuals to spread the word of God throughout the world, right? After all, this is the Great Commission as Christians, to spread God's glory to all who will hear it. So these 3 G's motivated many individuals and many more countries behind them to support exploration. And so as exploration began, it also happened to be the perfect timing for all this. New shipbuilding techniques allowed Europeans to make journeys overseas. First, Portugal and Spain, but then later on, the rest of Europe would get involved in sending out fleets to go explore distant lands in Africa, Asia, and eventually the Americas. See, a new technological invention had come about. This was the Portuguese caravel. The caravel was a faster ship, it lowered the travel cost, and it was able to make long voyages with a smaller crew. See, during this time, we really underestimate a lot of technological advancements. You know, we live in a very technological age, and we think that technology is just something that we use now. But it's important to understand that technological advancements, even in this time, had earth-shattering effects. So while we are dealing with computers, the internet, and AI, back then, this literally changed the landscape of the world. Caravels incorporated triangular sails from Arab ships and the rudder from Chinese designs. As well, the astrolabe that was originally invented by the Greeks had been improved upon by Muslim scholars. Muslim scholars had modified the astrolabe and improved upon it in order to more easily figure out their direction to pray towards Mecca. Likewise, the Chinese had invented the magnetic compass, and this allowed you to figure out where due north was. And if you know one direction, you can figure out the other ones, as any good Boy Scout will tell you. And so these technologies from around the world allowed Europeans to explore. So in the beginning, it required a massive amount of startup, what we would now call like venture capital funding or really startup money. And so Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal is known as Prince Henry the Navigator because he sponsored these Portuguese fleets and he established schools of navigation. In these schools of navigation, they taught the most modern sailing techniques. They taught how to use these new technologies like the compass and the modified astrolabe. And so the Portuguese used this technology, used this new brand of sailor to explore the African coast and try to find a route to India. Bartholomew Dias eventually did reach the southern tip of Africa and find his way around the Cape of Good Hope, which would eventually lead to Asia. Vasco da Gama is the first one to make his way around Africa and cross into the Indian Ocean and make his way to India before heading back. In May of 1498, he made contact with Indian merchants in Calcutta and established one of the first trade routes between Europe and Asia by sea. After da Gama returned to Portugal, he made a large profit off the cargo. When news came around that Vasco da Gama had made a large profit off of this trade route, this only heightened the fever pitch of exploration and started off a whole wave of European exploration. The Portuguese used these newfound trade routes to really create a monopoly on the spice trade. Taking control of the spice trade from Muslim traders overland, they created direct routes to the Indian Ocean and to the Pacific. By establishing trade routes in Goa and Malacca, Alfonso de Albuquerque, a Portuguese admiral, was able to monopolize the spice trade in a way that Muslims on the spice road simply could not compete with. And so as the Portuguese reached the Spice Islands, they signed exclusive treaties with the local leaders and created a monopoly. Now, this monopoly wouldn't last forever, as other Europeans wanted a piece of the puzzle. And so, when we talk about Columbus, it's important to dispel a couple myths. Europeans knew that the Earth was round. In fact, the knowledge of a round Earth had been around since the Middle Ages. Anybody who'd been on the coast notices that when you look at a ship coming over the horizon line, you see the top of the mast before the rest of the ship comes into focus, which represents the curvature of the Earth. And so while there were rumors of another landmass west of Europe, this was likely Greenland or even possibly Canada. We know that some Vikings had made their way out that way before. Columbus believed that that landmass was Asia, and that he could make a route across the Atlantic Ocean straight to Asia. And so that's what he set out to do. Right? And so in 1492, we know Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He reached the Americas, where he explored the coastlines of Cuba, Hispaniola, and bounced all around the Caribbean. Columbus believed that he had reached Asia and called the region of the Caribbean the Indies. Right? And so when we talk about the East Indies, these are what we're talking about. The West Indies are the islands around India and Southeast Asia. Ultimately, Columbus never found a route to Asia through the Americas, but without his expedition, it might have been later before the Europeans settled the New World. As you can imagine, there was a disagreement between Spain and Portugal as to who would get all these lands now discovered by Columbus. And so, in order to resolve these concerns, Pope Alexander VI signed the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, So this would put all the sort of disagreements to rest before they even really started. Unexplored territories to the east of the line would be controlled by Portugal, and then those on the west of the line would belong to Spain. So Portugal still got to control its African trade routes, still got to control its spice route to Asia. However, Spain would get dominion over the rest of the territory to the west, which, as we will come to find out, was a pretty good deal for Spain. This would be a really good deal for Spain because that line only cut off a little sliver of Brazil, which would become Portuguese, and the rest of what we call Latin America would go to the Spanish. This really kicked off a wave of exploration. As word got out of the Portuguese success in the Spice Islands and Spain discovering a new continent, other countries wanted to get a piece of the puzzle. And so a Venetian sailor named John Cabot explored the New England coastline in the Americas on behalf of England in 1497. Portuguese captain Pedro Cabral established Portugal's claim to the region later on and named it Brazil in 1500. See, remember, they'd gotten that tiny little sliver, which eventually became, the territory of Brazil as we know it today. Amerigo Vespucci, a Florentine, went on several voyages where his letters and maps led to the use of his name for the new continents. These other countries, seeing this wave of expansion, didn't want to miss out on the party. And so this is where we get the Dutch, the English, and the French really trying to take part in this wave of exploration. Spurred on by the promises of riches, seeing Spain and Portugal's success, the Dutch decide that they are going to send explorers to claim lands that they found in the name of the Netherlands. We get New Amsterdam, which will later become New York. Peter Minuit famously purchased the island of Manhattan from the Lenape people. So when Peter Minuit purchased the island of Manhattan from the Lenape people, there's a lot of conjecture around this story. See, it's always said that, these silly Native Americans, they traded this whole island for a chest filled with materials like cloth and beads and things that were relatively of little value to the Europeans. But in reality, understanding what we know about Native American cultures and their concept of property rights, in that you can't really own land, they thought they were taking advantage of the Europeans, saying, yeah, sure, if you want to buy the soil, I'll sell you the sky next. And so this area would later on be taken by the English, and they renamed it New York instead of New Amsterdam, after the Duke of York, who ordered the attack. And so we can see that this land, so this is just one example of how territories change hands over time. From the Lenape to the Dutch, and later on to the English, later on to the United States. This land has changed hands many times throughout its history. England decides that they are going to get a piece of the puzzle. Right? We know that they eventually conquer New York, but before that, they decide that they want to colonize the east coast of what will now be the U.S. The first colony in Virginia, the Roanoke colony, is one of the most strange mysteries in our nation's early history. See, this was the first colony settled in Virginia by the British, and unfortunately, it disappeared without a trace. The only sort of clues that were left was the word Croatoan inscribed on a few trees. To this day, historians and anthropologists don't really have an answer as to why it disappeared or what happened. Well, there are many theories as to why it suddenly disappeared. That being said, later on the English would establish Jamestown. This was the first permanent English colony in the United States, and led to a whole wave of British colonization after the fact. The British also looked to conquer the Caribbean, places like Jamaica, Bermuda, the Bahamas. France decides that they also want to get in on the action, and so they send Jacques Cartier to claim Canada or France. In fact, he's the one who gave Canada its name. Cartier would end up doing a series of explorations throughout Canada, and the French settled most of East Canada, the American Midwest, and Louisiana at the Mississippi River Delta. They called this area New France. And so, as you can see from the map here, France controlled a quite sizable portion of what is now the American and Canadian map. Control of these waterways, like the Mississippi and the Great Lakes, allowed for increased trade, which was vital to these French colonies. Most of these French colonies engaged in fur trade, trapping beavers whose warm pelts were sought after for cold European winters. So we can still see French influence in the United States to this day. Cities like Des Moines, Iowa, come from French words. Detroit used to be pronounced Detroit. Right? All these different places were originally settled by the French. In fact, a group of French called Acadians were flushed out of Canada after the English took over that territory later on. These Acadians moved their way down the Mississippi River to Louisiana, which was a French-controlled province. This mixture of French and English that they learned along the way became Cajun instead of Acadian. And so we see that there's still these whispers of settlement to this day. And so ultimately, what we see is, for a variety of reasons, Europeans felt compelled to branch out from their continent and explore the wider world, whether it was for the riches of gold in the New World, or trade routes to Asia, whether it was for individual glory and esteem, or to spread the word of God across the world. These explorers went and braved the elements and traveled large distances to meet their goals. And ultimately, without their explorations, the whole trajectory of humanity and of the Americas and the future United States could have been completely different. So, I hope you found today's lesson interesting. If you have any questions, leave those down in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And don't forget to ring that little notification bell so that way you get informed every time I upload a video. Thank you guys. My name is Mr. G, and I'll see you guys next time.
Storybox Audio.